So, as we start a brand new day back in Kawagoe's office, Kawagoe himself seems to be a little bit remiss in regards to a pretty odd subject. Namely the fact that even though he was close to all these cursed events, none of them seemed to have affected him. And Oyama, now being an RTS, can just talk naturally to his old friend and fill him in on the fact that, well, the reason it affected Oyama was because he was able to keep a good line between the scientific and the paranormal. And Kawagoe seems to agree with this theory. Also, Oyama goes into a little bit in regards to the fact that while his physical body was destroyed by the curse, his mental state, his consciousness was able to be preserved somehow digitally in the game world, though he doesn't really go too far into how that's possible. Still, Ren wants to be a little bit more realistic and still side on the possibility that this Oyama is just an AI or possibly a chat program. And she questions the possibility of how he can even be alive digitally. And Oyama seems to have some ideas about just what the definition of what alive is. I mean, in some cases, brain death is just complete death, and in other times, being comatose is enough to keep someone alive. Though in this case, Oyama just wants to be pedantic and say, well, you said I'm alive, so that must mean I'm alive. But Kawagoe has a very important question here regarding the possibility that somehow Oyama himself is spreading the curse. And Oyama is pretty adamant about the fact that he has been trying very, very hard to stop the curse being spread, but really it's something beyond his control. He was just a denizen in the game, after all. And it's here that Kawagoe goes into the idea that the game is more of a tool, some means of amplifying another person's negativity. Now, we've definitely seen that in the first game. We don't think that the game that was being made was the cause of the problem. Rather, it was how it managed to amplify Asahi's anger towards her father that really caused the curse to happen. And Oyama seems to agree since he himself is stuck in the game. And here, Oyama seems to fill us in on the bad news that while a person can kind of save themselves from the curse itself, there's no way to fully stop the curse because it's just a separate entity from whatever is currently going on in the game. Even though the game might be beaten, the underlying idea just continues to keep going, spreading to other people. And interestingly enough, he does bring up Akuda, the developer from the original game, thinking that he might be some avenue of information, which at least goes to show that the good ending from the first game could possibly be the canon ending, and that Akuda could be somewhere out there. So, while Ren is going to look into that, we are going to be looking into possibly a different avenue, and Ren is fully willing to go look for Akuda because at least that is something real to hold on to. Still, that does leave in question where we are going to be going, and Oyama does happen to have an answer for that. The Nanto Sunshine Academy. It seems that one of the people he was investigating at the karaoke club was a student at this school, and the school itself has a little bit of a sordid background. Namely the fact that it was shut down due to a large number of suicides. Or at least, that's what the media called them, when in actuality it was more likely due to the game's curse. And Kawagoe postulates further in regards to the fact that the regret we're seeing more often than not is not a young girl, it's not a fully developed woman, it seems to be somewhere in the middle, possibly a teenager. Someone that could very well have gone to this Nanto Sunshine Academy. And that definitely seems like a strong possibility of a place to investigate. Also, rather oddly and out of place, these two decide to have something of a comedic sidebar in regards to the fact that Kawagoe should probably be investigated in regards to negligence in regards to his students, but, well, I guess it's nice to have a little bit of levity here and there. Still, Ren decides to get very serious. She is going to be, I guess, checking up on Akuda or checking up on something by herself, so she just hopes that we stay safe as we head to the school. And as one would expect, this is very much what appears to be an abandoned, empty school. Before we get too far in, though, we do get our usual opening email. This time around, it's a very vague email from Ren, probably in regards to what she is investigating on her own. It does have some finality to it, I guess. Sure, it's nothing to worry about, though. We're gonna have our own troubles as we head through the school. Yeah, pretty much right off the bat, we do get a good visual indication of where we should head. And she is definitely going to be one of our strong indicators as to where to go. While it might seem like an initially empty classroom, there are some handprints on the desk, leading us to a key ring. That was odd. It did look like it was giving us our first sight at the game, but, well, just out of curiosity, I decided to check and see what our game looked like, but still just that odd, random cabin. Well, I guess we should just maybe try to go ahead and find out where to use these keys. I'm sure we'll figure out more about what we have to do in the RPG sections as we continue on. Just like that, we are back in the RPG. And here we find out that we are in the Kid Kingdom. Quite a fun and fanciful place full of young children and toys. But for all the toys and fun it might have, it's missing one major thing, and that seems to be food for all the young children. And that seems more than anything to be a good indicator as to something we have to do for the RPG. Also, as Davey pointed out there, from now on, if we happen to pull up the TS and access the game, it will always be in the RPG. So we won't have access to that cabin again, but it will be good to keep in mind the RPG section will always be available to us. Also, just from looking around this courtyard, it seems the school is very sprawling. We're going to have a lot to look around at. The good news is that this girl in white will be around pretty frequently leading us around, so we won't have to mistakenly try too many busted doors. But there is another drawback with having this girl in white around so much. And that's where the fact that wherever we see this girl in white, we see this girl in red as well. Thankfully, we are a little bit safer in the RPG section. And we can get a first item here. And it's some food, I guess, if we stretch the definition. Also, as Oyama is going to be our companion from now on in the game, he has decided to pop in and fill us in on some information we already kind of knew, which was that sometimes things we pick up in the game world will also affect and carry over into the real world. But that is pretty much all we can do in here. I was just a bit curious about what this room might be, but I think I was told earlier that the sign outside said this was the tennis room. But yeah, as we were out here earlier, you might have been able to hear the low moaning and huffing of a regret, but we didn't see one. And there's a good reason for that. Yeah, as Oyama might have mentioned in the hotel section of the game, sometimes regrets may be partially invisible. And without any real way to deal with this regret in the real world, instead we can enter the game world and feed the candy that we just found to this young NPC. And with her gone from the RPG world, likewise, that also clears away the negativity in the real world, allowing us to progress onwards. It's just kind of going along with what Oyama already pointed out to us. Sadly, though, it does seem that, for some reason, in regards to the location of the school, it seems to have made that girl in red a lot more aggressive. She seems to be popping up a lot more. It's a very bloody anatomical doll, but this seems like a very large room to have nothing going on in it, so this makes me think that I should explore in the RPG and maybe find something. And wouldn't you know it, we do find in this health room, or nurse's office, a cursed cartridge. And it also goes to show the fact that this particular stage really uses the TS a lot more than what we've seen, at least in a voluntary manner, in regards to, or in relation to some of the other stages. We're going to be getting a whole lot more usage out of the TS. Oh, yeah, it looked like there were some handprints on the TV. Go ahead and get another game update. Now, sometimes there are a little bit of a trap setup in regards to getting the treasure chests. Namely, in regard to this room, if you happen to get too close to some of these blades or get in their path, they will shoot out and you won't be able to dodge them, you'll just get killed. But it's easy enough to get out of their line of sight. And pick up some more food for that NPC waiting in the hall. We will be seeing that for the most part the setup in regards to the puzzles is pretty straightforward, in that we just had to get some food and give it to the NPC, but there will be a few additional hindrances thrown in, much like those blades we just saw. Also, you don't really need to go and interact with the girl in white in the RPG section. I think it's more or less there to indicate to you where you might need to go in case you open up the TS before you go looking around the real world in the game. Still, as we enter the art room here, I do find that even though we know this place to probably be long abandoned, it's still really odd to me that they left so much stuff sitting around. You'd figure the people that ran this place might want to come in, collect some of these odd bits and pieces, maybe collect the furniture, but no, seems to be trapped in time exactly where the final day of school left off. There's just a cacophony of noise coming from this kitchen area. I feel a little bit wary just walking straight into it, but this is another good use of the TS, in that we can sometimes get a layout of any kind of NPCs or regrets in the room beforehand. Seems that there's only one waiting in this room, off to the left-hand side, so it looks like we should be safe enough to hug the front of the classroom. At least I get that impression that it's safe up here. As there is no girl in white to direct us, we could patrol upwards into the hallway. Yeah, as we already saw on the RPG, that's probably not the best idea. Now, it also seems that heading into what I think might be the principal's office doesn't seem to be any better. Things just seem to be breaking and shattering everywhere in here, so let's just go ahead and get our game update and get out of here. So we're introduced to another small puzzle here. You might notice that some of the statues have swords and some of the statues don't. Just stay away from these statues with swords and you'll be fine. Simple enough to deal with, but it could catch you off guard if you're not paying attention. And with another ghost satiated, we can now continue on down the hallway. And we can finally explore up onto another floor. The girl in white is leading us yet again into what I think is a bathroom. Or another close scrape with danger. Still, for the most part, this bathroom is mostly safe. We can't really interact with any of the stalls. But there is a game update waiting for us in the final stall. Which gives us another little puzzle to figure out. It's pretty simple though. Just, we have to make sure we don't walk in front or in line of sight of any of these young boys. Otherwise they will childishly and menacingly push us into a pit. Still, not too terribly difficult to figure out. There is one problem though, and that's that the door is currently locked. And that means we're going to have to do another quick cursed platforming section. And as we are further and further into the game, it does get a little bit more difficult. A little bit more precision and quickness, but still not too terribly difficult. Also, before we deal with the regret in this hallway, I do want to check out the other bathroom. Because even though it is lacking in any kind of a scare event, it does have something else waiting for us in the RPG. And that is another cursed cartridge. So we saw from the RPG section that the NPC was different in the RPG. And very similarly, in the real world, we are greeted with another regret on this floor. Also, I assume, being as this is a young boy, that's why its reaction to the candy was a little bit different than the young girls. I don't actually assume that the bloodied candy we've been handing out are indeed eyeballs. Yeah, as we do have another classroom with a regret somewhere invisible inside of it. It's a good opportunity to look at the TS yet again, to get an idea just what the layout is in here. Because we see that there are now 2 regrets waiting invisibly in the classroom. And it looks like we could hug either wall and get through possibly safely. Just, we want to avoid going down the center. But I'm still not totally sure that we would be safe going down that way. That regret seemed a lot closer than it did in the game. Yeah, overall, I do like the integration and usage more of the TS in this chapter. There's not too much in this classroom, just that one desk over there. And it seems to have a very similar flower that we've seen quite a bit before, and looks to possibly be half a loaf of bread. Now, I think in some religions and cultures, this would normally be used as a ritualistic meal to be left behind for the dead, so that they don't go hungry on their passage to the afterworld. still very perplexed if this girl in white is actually attempting to help us or not. She always seems to be leading us one step closer to danger, just narrowly avoiding it. Still, though, in relation to the girl in red, she seems overall a lot more helpful. Especially if we look in comparison between the girl in white's game updates, which are these RPG sections, or the girl in red's game updates, which are the very, very masochistic platforming sections. Still, as we get further and further into the school, it gets much more easier to get lost. All these doors just seem to run together. And these classroom setups start to get a little bit more difficult to deal with if you decide not to look at the TS. But if you do look at the TS, you'll see that the Regret, or the NPCs, seems to be running a small patrol around the back end of the classroom. So we do have a means to work around its invisibility. Also, it's a little bit more difficult to notice, but with the left eye, there is an additional bit of static where you can see some small indication of an invisible Regret. That piano playing we heard outside was an indication of our next game update. In this incredibly spacious room, we find this massive, massive grand piano. And we see what could possibly be a room with traps, but it's just a very large room with a few holes in it that you can pretty easily avoid. It made me think initially that some of those holes might also be represented here in the real world, but no, it's pretty safe in here. what appeared to be a very similar scene to what we've seen before seemed very different, if only for the fact that the names for the characters were different. Oyama too seems to have noticed that similar change. And coincidentally, they happen to be the names of some of the students that went to this Nanto Sunshine Academy. Yeah, there is another regret waiting at the bottom of the stairs there. So we're going to go ahead and deal with that, as we have with many of the other regrets. Just going to feed it some candy, though I do also want to go ahead and get the cursed cartridge after we feed her the candy. Though that particular NPC did fill us in on the fact that we might be getting closer and closer to our final destination in the school. And as we find ourselves in another particularly large, if uneventful classroom, that does mean that there might be something more in the RPG section. And that does lead us to what I think to be the final cartridge in this chapter. We do have one last large hurdle to get through before we get to our final destination. This particular classroom has a pretty difficult set of regrets to get around. Looks like we're going to have to go down the center to get past these two patrolling regrets. We can't go down the far right side wall. As long as we're careful and we don't get too close, we are able to get through this small gap between them. Finally, we seemingly have run into that girl in white. But this time is odd. She doesn't seem to be going away. And that's because she has a very interesting story to tell us. First, though, we do get one email addressed to Akane. Though we can't see who the email itself is from. Yeah, in much the same way as the first game had you play a little bit from the perspective of Asahi, this game too takes you back in time to give you a little bit of a closer look at just what happened to some of the previous people that had to interact with the curse. Now, at this time, we don't really know who might be sending these emails to Akane, but they are definitely of a very threatening nature. We finally get some indication about who might be sending these, but still a bit really too early to tell. Yeah, we get an email from Kenta telling us that Naoki has been acting a little bit strange ever since they started to share that cursed game. And with this final email here, definitely seems that something is definitely wrong with Naoki. That he could possibly be sending all these threatening emails to Akane. But leaving all that aside, we now join Ren, possibly on another side of town, going to meet Mr. Okuda. But there's a problem. And that's the fact that apparently Ren has a copy of the cursed game. And this copy of the cursed game seems to be very, very different from what Davy has been having to deal with. This one seems to be of a much more personal nature to Ren. All that aside, though, Ren has suddenly noticed that the train car that should have been very, very busy is now suspiciously vacant. There very well could have been people here before, but they all suddenly left en masse, it seems. Well, except for one person. Now, we haven't known at this point that Ren has had a copy of the cursed game. We don't know how far she might have gotten into it, or if she's played it at all, but from the way these NPCs talk, it seems that she's possibly at the very end of her 7 days. That the game is really trying to motivate her to just give in and be taken over by the curse. Especially Yuto specifically, who seems to be under the impression that Ren was holding Davy back somehow. It's hard to tell if this is something based in reality or some manipulation on the game's part. But it definitely seems as if they're trying to make Yuto out to be very aggressive towards Ren. Seems to go against what was trying to be stated earlier, though a lot of those cutscenes now have a much different meaning if we think about the fact that, well, maybe we had just changed the names on somebody else's characters. Much the same way as the journey through the Nanto Express line was in the first game, Ren's journeys are only going to get much worse and worse as she progresses through.